Leonard Woolley was not a man who frightened easily. He had survived a Turkish prisoner of war camp during the First World War. He had spent years in the punishing heat of the Iraqi desert, excavating through sand and rubble with local laborers who trusted him and a British museum that mostly ignored him. But in the winter of 1928, kneeling at the edge of a trench at Tel al-Mukayyir, he went silent. Below him, arranged in perfect rows across the floor of a burial chamber, sealed for over 4,000 years, lay 74 human bodies. 68 women in full court dress, gold ribbons still threaded through their hair, lapis lazuli and carnelian still resting against their throats. 6 soldiers in copper helmets, spears at their sides, positioned at the edges of the chamber like sentries who had never been relieved of duty. No signs of violence. No evidence of struggle. They had laid down in formation and died together. Woolley sat at the rim of the trench for several minutes without speaking. He later wrote that he had read about divine kingship in academic texts his entire career. Now he was looking at it. The site was the ancient city of Ur, and the burial chamber, catalogued as PG 1237, would come to be known as the Great Death Pit. But the Death Pit was not the beginning of this story. It was the confirmation of something far older, something written on a clay tablet that most scholars had spent a century dismissing. The tablet is called the Sumerian King List. Multiple copies survive in museums across Philadelphia, Oxford, and Baghdad. The most complete version, the Weld-Blundell Prism, dates to roughly 1800 BCE, though the records it preserves reach back thousands of years earlier. The document is structured with the dry precision of a government ledger: city name, ruler name, duration of reign, next ruler, next city. The same formatting Sumerian scribes used for grain inventories, land transfers, and tax records. It was maintained and updated by different hands in different cities across more than 1,000 years. Nobody who kept it treated it as mythology. They treated it as the institutional record of political authority on Earth. And its opening line is one of the most quietly strange sentences in all of ancient literature. After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. Not a man seized power. Not one tribe defeated another. Kingship descended. The verb is deliberate. The Sumerian scribes who maintained this record chose a word that implies controlled downward motion. Something was placed, installed, lowered into position, and it was lowered into a specific city, Eridu, which their own records identify as the oldest settlement in the world. The tablet then names the first king, Alulim. He ruled Eridu for 28,800 years. That number appears on every surviving copy of the King List. It is consistent across centuries of scribal transmission, and it is by any modern standard impossible. But the Sumerians did not present it as legend, and that distinction matters. A 2018 tablet fragment recovered from the ruins of Ur introduced new language about Alulim's appointment. The text describes the gods choosing him from among vast numbers of people and assigning him what the tablet calls the shepherdship of the entirety of the people. Not rulership, shepherdship. The first king was not a conqueror, he was a caretaker, selected by beings the Sumerians called the Anunnaki, and tasked with guiding a species that had, until that moment, apparently been ungoverned. His chief advisor was a figure named Adapa, described elsewhere in Sumerian literature as the first sage, sent by the god Enki to deliver the foundations of organized life: writing, agriculture, law, medicine, mathematics. The texts do not describe Adapa in spiritual terms. They describe him the way you might describe an engineer deployed to a remote site with a set of technical manuals. He carried knowledge, he installed it. There is a strange practicality to all of this that tends to unsettle people when they encounter it for the first time. We expect ancient creation narratives to be poetic, symbolic, layered in metaphor. The Sumerian account is none of those things. It reads like a deployment log. Personnel were selected, knowledge was transferred, a governance structure was established, the language is administrative down to the grammar. Civilization, according to the Sumerians, was not something that evolved gradually over millennia. It arrived. If you find that idea worth exploring further, subscribe. I go deep on material like this every week. Alulim was the first of 8. The King List records 8 rulers who governed 5 cities before a catastrophic flood: Alulim and his successor Alagar in Eridu, 3 kings in Bad Tabira, Enmen-Luana, Enmen-Gal-Ana, and Dumuzid called the Shepherd, 1 king in Larak, Ensipad-Zid-Ana, 1 in Sipar, Enmen-Dur-Ana, and the last, Ubara-Tutu in Shuruppak. Their combined reign spans 241,200 years, and then the text records what happened next in 6 words that every scribe who ever copied this document preserved in exactly the same position, with exactly the same phrasing, across 1,000 years of transmission. The flood swept over. No elaboration, no dramatic narrative. The flood swept over. It reads the way an institutional record might note the closure of a government office due to a natural disaster. Bureaucratic. Final. There is something almost unbearable about those 6 words when you sit with them. 1,000 years of scribes copied this document, generation after generation, updating it with new rulers and new cities. Every single one of them preserved this line in exactly the same position, with exactly the same phrasing. None of them added commentary. None of them softened it. The world ended and the scribe logged it and moved on to the next entry. What follows is perhaps the most unusual passage on the entire tablet. Kingship descends from heaven a second time. The system restarts. A new city, Kish, receives the mandate. New rulers are appointed. But something has shifted. The reign lengths begin to fall. Jushur of Kish ruled for 1,200 years, still vast, but a fraction of the pre-flood figures. Etana, described as the shepherd who ascended to heaven and consolidated all the foreign countries, ruled for 1,560 years. Several generations later, Gilgamesh of Uruk, the most celebrated figure in all Mesopotamian literature, ruled for 126 years. The trajectory is unmistakable. Tens of thousands become thousands, thousands become hundreds, hundreds eventually become decades, 40 years, 30, 15. By the end of the list, the reign lengths are indistinguishable from those recorded by any other ancient civilization on Earth. If you plotted the numbers on a graph, you would not see randomness. You would see a curve, a smooth, asymptotic decline, the kind of shape a physicist would recognize from signal degradation or radioactive decay. The Sumerians had their own framework for what was diminishing. They called it the ME, usually translated as divine essence or divine authority. The pre-flood kings carried the full measure of it. Each successive generation after the flood carried less. The reigns shortened accordingly. Whatever the ME actually represented, the scribes documented its decline with the same methodical consistency they applied to everything else on the list. And no one has offered a satisfying explanation for why a Bronze Age civilization would construct a numerical pattern that conforms to a mathematical decay function thousands of years before that concept entered human thought. But here is what elevates the King List from curiosity to genuine historical problem. The later entries are real. Enme-Barajsi of Kish, recorded on the list with a reign of 900 years, is the earliest ruler independently confirmed by archaeology. Inscriptions bearing his name turned up on stone vessels at sites that had no connection to the King List itself. He was real. He ruled. He left physical evidence. Gilgamesh, long assumed to be purely literary, a character no more historical than Odysseus, has been referenced as a historical king of Uruk in multiple independent inscriptions discovered across different decades and different excavation sites. The further down the list you read, the more names correspond to bones, seals, and inscriptions pulled from the ground. The verification is not ambiguous. It is consistent, cumulative, and still ongoing. Each generation of archaeologists confirms another name that the previous generation had filed under legend. The list does not contain a dividing line. The scribes who maintained it did not separate the pre-flood kings into a section labeled myth, and the post-flood kings into a section labeled history. They used the same column structure, the same administrative language, the same matter-of-fact tone for Alulim of Eridu as they did for rulers, whose tombs have been physically opened and whose cylinder seals sit in museum cases today. To every scribe who ever held this document, it was one continuous record. Which brings us back to Woolley and to Over 12 years of excavation beginning in 1922, Woolley uncovered approximately 1,800 burials at Tel al-Mukayyar. 16 of them contained wealth so extraordinary that he designated them the royal tombs of dated to roughly 2600 BCE to 2400 BCE. The tomb of Queen Puabi was among the most intact. Her golden headdress weighed over 2 pounds and was built from hammered gold leaves, lapis lazuli beads, and carnelian stones arranged in a design so precise that modern goldsmiths have struggled to reproduce it. The gold itself had not tarnished. 4,000 years underground, and it still caught the light when Woolley's team lifted the soil away. A cylinder seal found on her body identified her by name and title. She was not anonymous, she was not symbolic. She was a specific woman who held specific power and was buried with the full weight of it. 52 attendants lay around her, servants, soldiers, and musicians, some still holding their instruments. They showed no signs of restraint, no broken bones, no defensive wounds. Forensic analysis suggests they consumed poison voluntarily, then arranged themselves in rows and waited to die. The formation held. 4,000 years later, Woolley found them in the positions they had chosen. The Great Death Pit held 74. The women wore court dress. The soldiers wore helmets. No ruler was identified inside the chamber. Whoever these 74 people followed into the ground either lay in an adjoining tomb that has not yet been found, or was removed at some point during the intervening millennia. What remained was the court itself, intact, ordered, dressed for eternity. There is a particular quality to the photographs from the excavation. The bones are fragile, crumbling, obviously ancient, but the gold is perfect. Time does not touch gold the way it touches everything else. The ribbons in their hair looked as if they had been placed that morning. The contrast between the decay of the human and the permanence of the metal is difficult to look at for long. The objects Woolley recovered from these tombs are now scattered across the British Museum, the Penn Museum, and the Iraq Museum in Baghdad. The standard of is a wooden box with mosaic panels depicting war on one face and a royal banquet on the other, soldiers in formation, chariots crushing enemies, a king receiving tribute while musicians play. It is the oldest known narrative artwork. Two sides of the same civilization, the violence that built it and the wealth that sustained it, held in a single object small enough to carry in both hands, then sealed in a tomb so it could accompany the dead. The bull-headed lyre is a musical instrument crowned with a golden bull's head, its beard carved from lapis lazuli, its eyes inlaid with shell. It was placed in the tomb so the dead could hear music where they were going. The ram in the thicket are two gold and lapis statues of goats standing upright to eat from a flowering tree, an image that predates the biblical story of Abraham's sacrifice by more than 1,000 years. Weapons of electrum, helmets of beaten gold shaped to individual skulls, cylinder seals linking specific rulers to specific gods by name. These were not symbolic gestures. An entire court, its music, its art, its military, its administration, was moved underground intact. The people who built these tombs were not performing ritual for its own sake. They were executing a transfer. The authority described on the King List was not abstract, it was operational, and it continued operating after death. The excavations have not stopped. In 2016, a team working at Basetki in the Kurdistan region of northern Iraq uncovered a previously unknown Akkadian palace containing cuneiform tablets and royal artifacts from a period that overlaps directly with entries on the King List. The palace had been invisible to modern archaeology until a routine survey turned up surface fragments. In 2022, at Tello, the ancient city of Girsu, a single dig site produced over 400 cuneiform tablets. Many contained administrative records, names, titles, and transactions involving kings whose existence had previously been attested only by the King List. Each excavation season pulls another name out of the text and places it in the dirt. Meanwhile, the geography of southern Iraq conspires against complete knowledge. Decades of conflict, looting, and political instability have left vast areas unexcavated. Satellite surveys reveal thousands of tells, the distinctive mounds formed by centuries of layered human habitation dotting the floodplain between the Tigris and Euphrates. Each one is a sealed archive. Each one might hold tablets, tombs, seals, names. The Sumerians left more behind than we have had the stability or the funding to recover. And then there are the 5 cities. The pre-flood section of the King List names them explicitly: Eridu, Bad Tibira, Larak, Sipar, Shuruppak. 5 cities where 8 kings ruled for a combined 241,200 years before the flood swept everything away. Of these 5, only Eridu and Shuruppak have seen significant excavation, and even that word is generous. Iraqi archaeologists dug at Eridu in the 1940s and 1950s. They found a sequence of temple structures built one on top of another, reaching back to approximately 5,400 BCE. At the lowest level, they hit virgin soil. The first construction. The beginning. Exactly where the King List says civilization started, but the excavation covered only a small fraction of the site. The rest of Eridu is still in the ground, undisturbed, unexamined. Shuruppak, the city of the last pre-flood king, was briefly excavated in the early 20th century. Archaeologists found a flood layer, a stratum of water-deposited silt and clay consistent with a massive inundation, dated to approximately 2,900 BCE. It was not subtle. The layer was clearly visible in the trench wall, a pale band of sterile sediment cutting across the darker occupation layers like a line drawn through a sentence. They found geological evidence of a catastrophic flood at the precise city the King List identifies as the last seat of power before the flood swept over. The text said the flood happened there. The ground confirmed it. Bad Tibira, where 3 kings ruled for a combined 108,000 years, has had almost no professional excavation. Larak has been tentatively identified but never systematically explored. Sipar has been dug primarily for its later Babylonian remains. The earliest layers, the ones that might correspond to the King List's pre-flood entries, remain largely untouched. So here is what we are left with: a document copied and maintained for over 1,000 years that records the political history of the earliest civilization known to exist. Its later entries are confirmed by independent archaeology. Its flood narrative corresponds to a geological layer found at the exact site the text specifies. Its description of divine royal authority matches the physical evidence of entire courts buried alive in tombs of gold and lapis lazuli. And its earliest section, the part that describes kingship descending from heaven and a man named Alulim ruling for 28,800 years, sits in a category that is not myth and not history but something in between, something we do not have a word for, because the cities are real. The formatting is consistent. The scribes did not distinguish between what we can verify and what we cannot. They wrote it all down the same way, in the same columns, in the same clay. Eridu is still there. Beneath the alluvial silt of southern Iraq, beneath 4,000 years of sediment carried by seasonal floods, the oldest city in the world holds whatever its first inhabitants left behind. The wind still moves across the site. You can visit it. You can stand on the mound and look out across a flat, dry landscape that was once wetland and marsh, fed by the Euphrates, dense with reed and fish and the raw material of the first urban experiment in human history. Somewhere below your feet, if the King List is to be taken at even partial face value, lies the infrastructure of the first governed society on Earth. The King List says a man named Alulim was chosen from among all people by beings who came from the sky. It says he was given authority to shepherd humanity. It says he ruled for 28,800 years in the first city ever built. Whether that is memory, metaphor, or something else entirely, depends on what is buried beneath Eridu, and we have not yet looked. If this kind of history is what you come here for, subscribe.